Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 24th, 2020. It's Friday, yay! So you get to take 2 days off from going to the office, if you're lucky. Coming up, all right, or you know, months, 2 months away from the office. Possibly true, also. I see the pending meat shortage stories have kind of blown up a little bit. So if you, like me, tried to spend some of yesterday's post-show perhaps increasing your freezer capacity and stocking it up with produce, fresh meat, whatever you can freeze, I guess, if you are a meat eater. If you're a vegetarian, walk around and gloat a little bit today. Why not? Go ahead and do it. We're all wrong and you're right. And that's kind of the way it is. And this will prove it. You know, just another average, ordinary day for a meat shortage, toilet paper shortage having, bread line having greatest economy the world has ever seen. I'm sure we'll bounce back from it just fine. All the toilet paper is restocked, right? How long has it been now since all of that disappeared from the shelves? About a month and a half. How are we doing on getting that back up there? There was an article out there somewhere. I may even have put it away for use on the show and never gotten to it. You know how the news is these days, about why it is that we haven't seen a replenishment across the board on paper goods. But apparently we're pretty much running at capacity. That's essentially the problem. Long story short on that one, there aren't any more toilet paper making machines. They're all running 24/7. We just went crazy. So, okay, I think we've shortened that story for you. Daily Co's Radio is live now. I wanted to let you know that. Bill wanted to let you know that. I'll let you know that Bill let you know that had happened. Kagro X, me, David Waldman. Here's what's up for the day. I'll be reviewing Trump's new safety guidelines for swallowing a water buffalo to cure yourself of coronavirus. Everyone, look, pigs hunt for truffles, water buffalo hunt for coronavirus. It's just the way it is. And as you know, it helped the little old lady who swallowed a fly, eventually. So you should try it too. They're the greatest safety guidelines in history, many people are saying, and they're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, I guess the major news of the day is that the president said you should, I don't know what, put a flashlight down your throat or up wherever you might be able to fit one in, let's say. You know, different people have different options is all I'm saying. And I guess UV light, you know, I gather from not watching the press conference that what happened was he found out that in a lab, they, found out that you could kill coronavirus and most viruses with enough ultraviolet light. Sunlight will do it eventually. That using disinfectants are effective. This is a brand new discovery, not at all printed on the outside of every bottle of disinfectant solution sold in the United States of America and around the world. It kills viruses, yes. This is true. And so I guess from what I was able to gather, I watched the clips of it. And, I guess just as a matter of routine caution, we're normally conditioned to say, maybe there's some context missing from this one. But no, I guess he mused aloud, essentially, well, these things kill it in a lab, in a petri dish, if you stick them in a petri dish and then put this stuff on it or subject it to this, it kills the virus. So why can't we do that with people? That is to say, not put them in petri dishes and fry them to death with ultraviolet lights, although that may be what comes of this. But rather, why can't we, well, I understand the problem is that the virus gets inside the body. Why can't we put this ultraviolet light and these disinfectants in the body so that it goes and kills the virus? So we're left with the president going on national television and telling people that maybe you could inject disinfectants And maybe there's a way to get ultraviolet light into your body through the skin or some other way. What do you want me to do? Sit here and analyze it? I can't. I can't help you. I mean, at this point, maybe anything's possible. But now all the doctors in the country are having to, put out warnings. When the doctors are working in I don't know who needs to hear this but mode, when they should be, perhaps doing something else or saving people who have coronavirus or whatever, or just relaxing if it's their day off or they have coronavirus or they're retired or anything, or they've stopped to eat breakfast, whatever it is. If you're operating in that mode, there's something seriously wrong with the system by which we're disseminating advice. I guess he turned briefly to Debbie Birx to get her reaction to it, and that was circulating too. She's just like blinking uncontrollably and I guess tries to salvage something. It was a very crystalline demonstration, I thought, of the normalization process. So they were trying mightily to make something of nothing or less than nothing. They were trying to make a positive situation out of a dangerous misapplication of everything. It's just not, there's no way to properly apply any of what he had to say. So, I'm puffing it up just by talking about it at all. So maybe I just need to stop. In case you were wondering about it and you didn't think that my approach to it was sensible or comprehensive enough, it is on the front page of Daily Kos. Headline from Mark Sumner: no matter what Donald Trump says, do not inject yourself with bleach to cure coronavirus. And I know that's absolutely, it's correct. It's the responsible take on this. This is absolutely what good news organizations and opinion organizations should be disseminating. There is a temptation, I have it, to say, if you are inclined to listen to and support the president, give it a try. Because maybe it'll work for you. The problem is it will kill you. I'll feel bad at some point. And I'll regret having told you to do it, or they could arrest me, or, any of those sorts of things could happen. And I don't want that bad stuff to happen. And generally speaking, I still try to hope that I'm the sort of person that doesn't wish, for mass deaths. Although, quite honestly, there are days, I'm telling you. Anyway, okay. So I won't recommend that for anybody. I will point out a couple of other things that occupied my morning on Twitter anyway, which I think are worth discussing. It takes us backward a little bit, back to some stuff we've already discussed, but these things tend to play out over time and come back again. These themes tend to repeat because they're real and they're meaningful. So before we move on to some of the other things that I've been waiting for Friday to get around to, let's see. I did see Greg Sargent discussing this morning something. I guess he was pointing to an NBC write-up. Greg Sargent this morning saying, quoting from it, Trump and his top aides have played favorites in awarding contracts and allocating scarce resources. There's growing evidence Trump and aides are using his authority over contracting and allocation for political gain. There's plenty of evidence of that. It's just nice to have it plainly stated by NBC and for Greg to recognize how important it is that it be stated this way. It was a report, comes from John Allen, so he's one of their senior analysts. We should take a look at the at the piece. Or should we take a look at that, or should I tell you what I think it means before we dive into it? Well, how about I mix it up? We'll dive into the piece, and eventually I'll get sidetracked and say, I gotta tell you what I'm thinking about this. So, the headline on the NBC News piece, want a mask contract or some ventilators? A White House connection helps. This is, so far, it's only the headline, but so far pretty much overlaps with what we've been hearing, that the key element to getting what you need to treat coronavirus in your state, your locality, your hospital is having Jared Kushner's phone number and being able to give it to somebody that Jared Kushner is likely to view as an ally or an important person, whether that means a Republican or a symbolic Democrat who can be won over to being forced into offering some faint praise for the administration or something like that. All right, so if you want any of this stuff, a White House connection helps. And the connection to have is Kushner, and the way to get him is his cell phone. Trump and his top aides have played favorites in awarding coronavirus contracts and allocating scarce resources. That was the subheader. That's what Greg Sargent grabbed for his pull quote for this. Jonathan Allen is accompanied on the byline here. Phil McCausland and Cyrus Farivar. I hope I've got your names right. In early March, Mike Bowen, the executive vice president of the medical mask manufacturer Prestige Ameritech. What an exercise in corporate naming that is. Well, he found the perfect way to drum up some federal business. He went on Steve Bannon's podcast, which is highly popular at the White House. That's very sad. I had, from time to time I put Steve Bannon out of my mind, which is, of course, where he's been the whole time. He's out of his mind. And now he's been doing a podcast. I'm amazed that they still listen to it. And, well, that's some good thinking there by the Prestige Ameritech people. You'll have to excuse me today, as I don't have Greg on hand to distract everybody while I sip a little tea to try to keep the frogs under control today. So you all get to enjoy me. I'm actually literally sipping tea while I watch Donald Trump destroy America. You can join me in this. But I think it'll help. Maybe not. If the government wants to throw some money at it, hey, why not? We can hire more people and build more machines. Bowen said during an appearance on the War Room podcast, co-hosted by Bannon, the other co-host is Satan, who was the chief executive officer of Donald Trump's presidential campaign in 2016. You know who he is. Total scumbag, etc. We're kind of out there on our own, and we're doing everything we possibly can do on our own. And it's not a crazy view here from Bowen. They'll be producing at top capacity. And yeah, it's not an outrageous thing to say. If the government wants to throw some money at it, we can hire more people and build more machines, and then capacity will increase. The problem is that he's going through, this ridiculous, discredited person as a conduit to the White House. A month later, at the explicit request of the White House, Prestige Ameritech had a $9.5 million contract with FEMA. It then won another deal with the state of Texas. That's going to get stolen. And was given 50 National Guard members deployed by Republican Governor Greg Abbott to work shifts at its suburban Fort Worth manufacturing facility. That's interesting. I mean, it's a little fascist, but it's interesting. Bannon told NBC News that his team... I'm sorry, I have to laugh because, of course, he does a podcast, and I'm sure it's more professionally produced than this one and everything, but I'm laughing at the idea of his team. And the team may not be his podcast team necessarily. I'm laughing because I imagine issuing orders to my team. Get in touch with the White House. And people looking at me funny or tweeting to me 2 hours later, I'm busy, I can't do that, whatever. Okay. All right. Well, he told his team, and he's got one, his team connected Bowen to Peter Navarro, a top economic and trade advisor to Trump, who, like Bowen and much of Trump's political base, has long been upset about the movement of U.S. factories to Mexico and Asia. Prestige Ameritech's deal with FEMA is one of only two that NBC News could find in the history of the federal contracting database that says explicitly that a White House ordered it up. Directed by the White House, in quotes there, according to the notes entered by a contracting officer. And this begins to get at what I'd like to say about this piece and what it means. There's a big operation over there doing sourcing, Bannon said. Navarro and all the guys listen to the show every day. Yeehaw, isn't that fun? They should be working, but that's what they're doing instead. They're listening to, in the middle of the biggest crisis of federal government that we've faced in years, they're listening to the podcast about deconstructing the administrative state. Fantastic. That's why things suck. That's why there's no meat, No toilet paper. There's still meat now. Go get it and everything. By the way, I spent the afternoon trying to buy a new freezer to put all the meat in. You know what's out of stock? Freezers. So there you go. Everybody had the same idea. The collective is very smart. For the White House, the episode is a perfect example of how the president's coronavirus task force cut through red tape, this is for the White House, to reward a domestic manufacturer at a time when supplies are limited and the task of obtaining them from overseas is fraught with rapidly rising trade barriers and the risk of receiving substandard products. That now becoming an even bigger problem. Also predicted by, pretty much everybody who knows how the world works. But it also shows something else. How Trump and his top aides have played favorites in awarding contracts and allocating scarce resources. Using the unilateral authority of the White House, think about that, Trump and his aides have consolidated power in a period of national crisis, picking winners and losers based on, in part, on personal relationships, ideological affinity, and partisan loyalty. Ultimately, that favoritism has created a two-track system of haves and have-nots in what Trump calls the war against coronavirus, a model revealed in dozens of interviews that NBC News conducted with federal, state, and local officials, health industry professionals, emergency response veterans working on the crisis, and current and former White House officials. Put simply, the fight for survival among businesses related to the COVID-19 fight and for a slice of the billions of dollars going out the door is about political influence. And let me add that the fight for survival among people who are literally fighting for survival is also now about political influence. This is war. It is civil war against us. It's treason. It's fomenting insurrection, as people say, for sure, certainly. And it's levying war against the United States. And one of the actual elements of constitutional treason. But, whatever. Forget about that. Now, I guess before going on with all this, now is a good time to maybe jump in with my own comment on what's going on here. I would like to reiterate something we've discussed a little bit on the show before. This reality of how the contracts for the procurement are awarded and how the supplies are distributed out the other side, together, broadly speaking, invalidates the authority that is being used or claimed by those who say, anyway, that they're federal officials when they are seizing or rerouting shipments of PPE and other supplies, ventilators included, etc. And as I've explained before, the authority and the primacy that the federal government rests here on the assumption that it will be acting on some legitimate basis, that there's a real reason and a meritocratic or close to it process and procedure for doing what they're doing. The argument in the first instance in court when there's a conflict between federal power and state power, or federal power and local power, federal power and anything else, and the feds usually win on this because we follow a certain procedure normally. But the feds usually win on this because they're able to claim and able to make use of the assumption, as a matter of judicial canon here, the assumption that, of course, the federal government will be working in the best interests of, or at least what the administration believes to be and claims to be the best interests of the country, and that will be backed up, if not by, evidence that that's the case, or demonstrable, or I guess demonstrated efforts to distribute the materials, let's say in this case is a hypothetical, using what's going on and what we're after, the PPE, distributing it fairly to areas most greatly in need according to someone's metric. And even if your metric is crazy, you'll be given an opportunity to present your metric, and still, in most cases, the federal courts will assume that the judgment of the people put in a position to make these decisions by the person elected by the Electoral College, but whatever, but endowed by the Constitution with the power to make the decision about who will make the decisions is enough. But we safeguard against this kind of misappropriation of resources by requiring that there be procedures grounded in reality, published and available and examinable by everybody, challengeable in court, etc., etc. And this bypasses all of that under the claim, as the article notes, that they are bypassing just stupid bureaucracy and red tape, right? But the ability of the federal government to win these cases against anybody else is all based on the presumption that, well, when the time comes, the federal government will be able to make the case that they were doing something rational and fair, or at least some properly authorized official's idea of fair and balanced, and demonstrably helpful, or at least, a claim of being helpful. But what's happening here is, the old keywords that I taught you about administrative law, arbitrary and capricious. This is these seizures and the handing out of these contracts are arguably, in fact, actually arbitrary and capricious misapplication of federal power. And in the end, I would tell you, constitute probably prosecutable state crimes, which of course would not be pardonable by the president. Just something to think about for the states who are losing control of their shipments. But again, we've discussed this before in a slightly different context. I think we were talking about it last in the context of Ukraine and how making arbitrary and capricious and ad hoc policy decisions on the fly about how we would deal with Ukraine and how our foreign policy would be conducted so that the president got his preferred political outcome, posed the same problem. That, no, you can't just fire all the diplomats and all of the career civil servants and bring in another hotel magnate and say, from now on, this is going to be the policy, even though it doesn't actually further any pro-American ends. You can't just declare that to be the case without going through an interagency policy process and review in order to back up the idea, at least, that you tried to make a non-arbitrary, non-ideological, or non-political process to come up with a policy. But they skip all that because that's just red tape in their view. But again, as I put it here, when I wrote down and organized my thoughts, the formulaic and process-based system for the distribution of emergency aid or anything else, or aid to Ukraine or whatever, that process, the bureaucracy, which Trump and his operatives dismiss as useless red tape, was adopted for everybody's safety. It's a safeguard, first of all, against exactly this kind of misappropriation. And as a result, it is by itself prima facie evidence of corruption when you go around it. You're on your way to court once you violate the process, because the assumption is the only reason for violating the process is to get to an arbitrary and capricious outcome. Now you'll be given a chance to prove that you've done something other than that in court, but this will get you there. But in addition, of course, to being a safeguard against misappropriation, it's also a safeguard for the people acting or claiming to act under federal authority. The people who are conducting these seizures believe that they are immune from prosecution, not just because they would be pardoned by the president if they were found guilty of a federal crime, and this could also, of course, be a state crime. You won't be charged with a federal crime. Bill Barr won't do that to you. But ordinarily, this is a safeguard against finding yourself in serious trouble. If you stick to the process, if you're questioned or you find yourself for some reason dragged into court over these decisions, you'll be able to point to your adherence to the process as a presumptive defense. This is an absolute defense. If you followed federal procedure that's designed to at least stand initially in the way of facilitating corruption, you're going to do well in your argument that you weren't corrupt. You get the picture? I mean, I've explained this better in the past, but again, we have explained it in the past. We'll return here to the NBC News piece before heading out for the break. Most of the decisions in this stupid battle they're fighting are made by members of Vice President Mike Pence's coronavirus task force, which works closely with White House senior advisor Jared Kushner's innovation team and a series of sub-task forces that are primarily charged with acquiring and distributing scarce goods. Because there are so many genuinely needy entities and there's so little to give, those decisions are zero-sum trade-offs, as always. Just like the awarding of a limited supply of federal contracts to the many businesses vying to take a piece of the action. It's a good parallel. There's growing evidence that Trump and his aides are using his authority over both the contracting and allocation processes for political gain. This is a no-no. That's what the process is there to prevent. It's easy to chalk that up to partisanship, but the record suggests that while Trump favors Republican allies the most, he is more interested in bringing politicians and businesses into his fold than in following the straight axis of Republican-Democratic divide. And it's politically wise. It just happens to, also be illegal. Much of the flexibility in who gets supplies comes from a secretive adjudication process, and that's in scare quotes and ought to be, adjudication process, in which senior political appointees have the power to circumvent formulas designed to apportion test kits. Formulas, because formulas are, of course, objective and presumed to be fair. But let's get rid of them because we don't want to be objective or fair, right? So the appointees have the power to circumvent the formulas designed to apportion test kits, ventilators, masks, gloves, gowns, and other personal protective equipment based on evolving needs. Not political needs, but actual medical needs. Well, instead, there's a lot of politics involved. And you'll find out more about it after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, so let's continue on with our view of what's going on here at the NBC article here and commentary on it. Let's see. Where were we? We left off when finding out there was a lot of politics involved instead of the so-called adjudication process, and that's a generous name for it. It's not just me saying there's a lot of politics involved. It's a quote here, although it's an unnamed quote. It's a person familiar with the adjudications. There's a lot of politics involved. Some leadership from Capitol Hill can call up, senior leadership that is, and say, ship 500 ventilators, and 500 ventilators go out. In case that's not clear, what does that mean exactly? That means Mitch McConnell can call the White House and tell them what states have vulnerable Republican senators up for re-election in 2020 and would therefore benefit most from a political boost from doling out ventilators. Except nobody's done the 500 yet. They've been doled out in shipments of 100, and we heard about those when they happened. Cory Gardner, Colorado, definitely vulnerable, definitely got 100 ventilators. What's her name? Martha McSally in Arizona, definitely vulnerable, definitely got 100 ventilators, and everybody made sure to get on Twitter and thank President Trump personally for sending 100 ventilators to them, and how everyone in the state should now reward him for this ridiculous scheme by voting for him so that he can recommend that they drink bleach or inject bleach later on, I guess. Okay. At the same time, frontline responders in big cities and some Democratic states, from Phoenix to Detroit to New York, are scrambling to put together homemade gear because they can't get government-issued equipment and the masks, gloves, and gowns that they're trying to buy, and in some cases did buy, on the private market. And those shipments are often being delayed or rerouted, or the word we're looking for here is stolen. Most of the sources experienced in various aspects of emergency management who spoke to NBC News say the politicization of the disaster response is unprecedented in modern history. That's right. We also mentioned the other day in passing, as Greg was talking about it, that this undoes 100 years plus, I think, of reform in these processes. And the reforms have all been anti-corruption in nature, and this undoes all of it, if it's allowed to stand. And I think it will, because the people who are supposed to be in charge of making sure that the laws are being faithfully executed are in on the scheme. So here are a few examples, many of which you know about already, and many of which, the first of which I mentioned about a minute ago. Key allies are rewarded. Senators Cory Gardner of Colorado, ding, and Martha McSally of Arizona, ding. Two of their party's most politically vulnerable lawmakers, it's almost as if I read this already, which I haven't, but I've read the news elsewhere, have been able to claim credit publicly for using their influence with Trump to secure ventilators for their states. Governor Ron DeSantis, who presides over a state that is both Trump's official home. Now, he says apparently the address he claims for his legal voting address is actually a beach club. I don't know if you know that. Yeah. That seems weird to me. The sort of thing that would get you bounced off of the voter rolls if you were, let's say, not a white guy. Anyway, so it's his official home, of course, and of course crucial to his re-election hopes. Well, DeSantis says the president has delivered everything he needs. Meanwhile, other big jurisdictions across the country say they are scrambling to find test kits and personal protective equipment. Another example, the politics work as reward and punishment. Kushner has praised the president for being very, very hands-on, and they're small hands, so in order to have his hands on a lot of things, he's got to move them around a lot, wave them, like I just did, and I hit the microphone when I did it, too. Isn't that great? Okay, so he's been very, very hands-on in determining where goods are shipped, which is a bad thing and something you shouldn't admit to, by the way, Jared, but you know how he is with things like how government works or whether or not you can go to jail for things, like his dad. Okay. He's been very, very hands-on in determining where goods are shipped, and Trump said over the weekend that he might withhold federal support for the states of governors who don't accede to his request that they loosen stay-at-home restrictions, which is amazing because now governors will not know what to do because just yesterday he took a giant dump on loosening stay-at-home restrictions because he found out that they polled at 7% or whatever the hell we were talking about yesterday. Those outside the circle are vulnerable. That's the next point. Last week, it took the intervention of a powerful Democratic House chairman to stop federal agents from seizing a shipment of personal protective equipment acquired privately by a Massachusetts hospital system. Frustrated state and municipal officials complain frequently, almost exclusively on the condition of anonymity to avoid hurting their prospects of getting future aid, which is another level of this problem, about reports that expected shipments have been rerouted or seized by the federal government. On what authority, we might ask? And again, just to reiterate the argument, usually the authority here is that which is usually recognized by the courts for reasons. As always, for reasons in the legal field. What are the reasons that the federal government should be allowed to seize things away from state governments? And the reason is there's a higher purpose, a real formula that will that's been generated to try and distribute aid across competing states and districts in a way that will save the most lives or make the most strategic sense. Or you could even say, well, we're not doing it with an eye towards how many lives are saved. We're doing it with an eye towards, I don't know, it could be anything. If you wanted to argue, we were trying to fortify the northern border states against the threat, so we would be most prepared to repel invasion. If you believe it, and I guess could show some sort of information that would tend to make skeptical judges or justices believe that there really was a northern invasion threat, or just say, that's our defense policy, that would be enough to do it. But they don't even bother with all of that. It's very clear why things are going where they're going. They admit to it. And it's either, I guess ultimately, like everything else, if 5 justices say, we've been wrong about procurement law all along, the patronage system is really fine, and we should go back to it. You remember learning about that in American history class? It's a kind of a blurry memory probably for most of you. The patronage, the spoils system, right? They are very clearly and openly advocating for bringing that back. The growth of the administrative state that Steve Bannon complains about, that's why this makes a certain amount of sense, I guess, has largely been around this sort of thing, about making up rules designed to minimize the influence of personal corruption and politics in the way the federal government distributes and allocates resources. That's chiefly the aim of what has become the administrative state. Steve Bannon says no to that because reasons. And somewhere in pocket, we may even get to it, I do have the evidence we need to establish that, yes, they are openly advocating for a return to the spoils system. They're very clear about it. Hopefully we'll get there. Remind me if I don't. But I guess you'll have to remind me next week. All right. Next point up here. Some hard-hit states are left scrambling for White House workarounds. 2 Democratic governors, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois and Gavin Newsom of California, as well as Republican Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, have cut deals with foreign suppliers to go around the White House's system. And mind you, that carries a lot of negative connotations, going around the federal government. But remember, what did the federal government tell governors they should do if they didn't have protective equipment? Get it yourselves. So they went to get it themselves, and they still found it stolen by the feds. What kind of system could possibly justify that isn't arbitrary and capricious? Well, anyway, they've gone around it, trying to cut their own deals. Some state-level officials say they have concluded that the White House moves to corner the market, which is a weird thing to do for people who hate socialism. The White House moves to corner the market on medical supplies, and their moves have made it impossible for them to acquire what they need. Why would they corner the market if they wanted the states to get it themselves? Why would they give out contradictory instructions to the states if they didn't want them to get it themselves? There's no way that can't... How does that pass the arbitrary and capricious test? It can't. Senior administration officials say the acquisition and allocation systems are free from political influence, even as Trump talks openly about the importance of deference to him in the process. It's outrageous that the media would ask or even speculate that the resources are being delivered by the federal government to the states and it's somehow based on politics. Judd Deere, a White House spokesman, said in a statement emailed to NBC News. Well, that's completely wrong. This is about saving lives. This is how you would want to argue it in court. It's just a lie. But, you're not supposed to lie in court, yada, yada. But you know how they are about that these days. Anyway, this is about saving lives, and the Trump administration has been working with governors and their teams since January, on COVID-19 coordination. It's a lie in itself. Just the January part. Every level of government needs to deliver data-driven solutions, and that is what President Trump is doing in partnership, I guess, except the data is polling data. That's not supposed to be the sort of data you'd use to drive this thing. But a federal government veteran of national emergency response said the influence coming from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is unparalleled. I've never seen anything directed by the White House like this before, said the source, who insisted on anonymity out of fear of retribution. Probably true, but I'll remind you that we actually had quotes on the record from, what was it, General Honore, right, who had coordinated Katrina response, said very much the same thing. I doubt this is him because he's on the record, but who knows? Whoever this is just echoing his very good opinion. Next up, what about that very, very hands-on stuff? Even when Trump has delivered on requests from governors, senators, and other politicians, the importance the president places on personal relationships and the ways different officials play to that tendency, which parts of him they're willing to tickle while they do it, underscores the degree to which the allocation of goods isn't based purely on need, because it's arbitrary and capricious. Big and small decisions on allocating hard-to-get testing kits, protective equipment for emergency workers, and life-saving ventilators are often made on the personal intervention of political heavyweights on the coronavirus task force, including Pence and Kushner, according to federal officials familiar with the process. At one point in early April, Trump called Kushner. Kushner said at a White House briefing, he called Kushner said at a White House briefing, and told him that friends were relaying concerns that public hospitals in New York didn't have enough protective gear. You're right, they didn't. Kushner called the CEO of the city's public hospital group to confirm what was needed, and then had the coronavirus task force's top supply chain official ship a month's supply of masks. The president has been very, very hands-on on this, Kushner said at the time, and that is like at least a salvageable example where there was at least some demonstrable need. The question is, ironically, here there should have been a process to weigh New York's very legitimate need against the legitimate needs of other states. They may very well have come out with the same decision, but there needs to be a process that isn't filtered through the political. Remind you, I don't know if it's mentioned in this piece here, but I feel like, didn't we read something yesterday, an important part missing here? I'll reread you, in brief, this paragraph, right? Okay. At a White House briefing, Kushner says Trump called him at some point and said friends were relaying concerns about public hospitals in New York not getting enough masks. So Kushner calls them, says, what do you need? They said masks. He calls somebody else and says, ship them a month's supply of masks. Good thing, right? Cutting red tape, innovation, thinking outside the box, being nimble, a nimble federal government, right? All that is good stuff. Okay. Now, not mentioned here, but worth considering is the point we glossed over, we breezed by yesterday, when in another context, I guess, or maybe even this context, someone was asking, hey, Jared Kushner's on not only the coronavirus response task force, but the first abortive attempt, and maybe he's still on it then, the task force to reopen America and America's business again. Right? So he's got that, plus, of course, all, Middle East peace, opioid crisis, et cetera, on his plate. So all those things. And somebody said, hey, with all this going on, is Jared still also the White House's chief liaison to the re-elect campaign? And the answer was, oh yeah, 100%. So what you've got going on here is the top White House official who's supposed to be firewalled off in a way as the liaison to the campaign. That's a nod to reality. You can't completely separate the presidency from the campaign. You try and do as much as you can in a normal functioning administration. This one tries to blur all the lines. But the same person who's the chief liaison to the re-elect effort is also the person making the decisions about how to cut red tape and for whom to cut red tape. It's not just, well, I got this emergency call and I did the best I could for people who needed it. It was, the president called me and said his friends say that the public hospitals don't have this thing, and that's why I responded. And also, my other job, which is making sure that the re-elect campaign goes well, two birds with one stone. I'm first asked to circumvent the process because friends of the president were complaining, and I agreed to do it on that basis. I also then made sure that everybody knew that President Trump was very, very hands-on because, after all, I'm also working on the re-election effort. That's a missing element in all this, but you should never lose sight of it. In late March, Pence, a former governor of Indiana, spoke to his successor, Republican Eric Holcomb, by phone. Holcomb said at a news conference later that day, he said that they spoke at a news conference later that day. It's a fine construction. I just missed it. Holcomb said he needed more tests for the state, where the federal government's focus on hotter spots like New York meant lab workers weren't able to get diagnostic equipment. The number of tests available to Indiana has expanded rapidly since then, and the state has loosened its restrictions to allow families of covered workers to get tested. I was able to share with him what our concerns were, Holcomb said at the news conference. It sounds like a good thing, right? But on what basis do people get picked to share what their concerns are? And the answer is politics, and that's impermissible. Last week, Trump suggested that he would use the threat of holding back support for states if governors don't abide by his request to open up their economies by relaxing stay-at-home rules. But then he went on national television and said that the governor of Georgia, who was relaxing stay-at-home rules, was wrong, and he disagreed, et cetera, et cetera. So, on the small matter of funding states in the middle of this emergency with the resources that they need to address the emergency, we don't know what we're supposed to do or how to get in the good graces of the president to participate in his illegal scheme to dole out the assistance. It's not only do you have to violate the law to do it, you can't even find clear instructions from day to day on how it's done. There can be no more capricious system, no more arbitrary system imagined. Last week, that was the threat. Let's see. They need the federal government not only for funding, and I'm not saying take it away, but they need it for advice, Trump said. This is part of his threat. They'll need maybe equipment that we have. Is there something we have in this hand that you as states would want? Yeah, right. Well, we have a tremendous stockpile. You don't. It was threadbare, but now you've stolen everything. Now you, quote unquote, I have somehow a tremendous stockpile that we're in the process of completing. We're in a very good position, thanks to piracy, I would add. From the perspective of the White House, Pence's task force and Kushner's innovation team, working with various subtask forces, have acted as catalysts to get supplies to the recipients who really need them as quickly as possible. They have used their powers to subvert governors and other officials who are claiming they need more than they really do, according to senior administration officials who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal matters. That's the defense that you would offer up in court. But critics at various levels of government describe a new system that is neither fair nor transparent. Those would be two major elements of a acceptable regime under the normal system of law, and one that has enabled Trump to consolidate power. At the state and local levels, the White House often creates new complications in the search for protective equipment. First, the federal government has driven up prices on equipment and outbid state, county, and city governments, as well as hospital systems, on the open market, a move that wasted the time of smaller bidders and increased costs for anything they could get. Then, with scarce goods in hand, Pence's task force and Kushner's innovation team struck deals with U.S. suppliers and distributors that give the White House discretion to route and reroute, or route, goods at a moment's notice, which has resulted in state and local officials complaining that their shipments are being intercepted by the federal government. That's an interesting point for unraveling a little bit there, too, just as we unraveled the weirdness of the ventilator contract the other day. So the claim here is that in the name of innovation, the White House team has struck specific side deals with suppliers and distributors. We'll cut you in on the lucrative contracting if you sign this paper, this document, this codicil that gives the White House discretion to reroute the shipments even in mid-shipment, even en route, if you will, to change the direction so that essentially, I guess what this is designed to do is to act as a defense against the piracy charge, the theft charge. Well, we didn't intercept, seize, or steal these shipments. We exercised our contractual rights with the supplier or manufacturer to reroute them away from the people who had agreed to purchase them, or maybe even purchase them outright. I'm still unclear about whether any money changes hands or whether they limit themselves to cash on delivery shipments to steal. I don't know if they know how they can tell the difference or would have such scruples, or whether it would help them at all in court, even if they did. All right, and most recently, Trump and his Chinese counterparts have initiated matching export restrictions on personal protective equipment, choking off an alternative source of needed goods. After Trump issued an executive order to block U.S. companies from sending PPE overseas without a federal government's assent, China imposed a new rule requiring one of its agencies to inspect equipment for quality control before it can be shipped. That's a good cover. I like that one because that one sounds like it has a non-arbitrary and capricious basis to it. Well, we want to make sure it's of good quality, because that's been a problem for people who buy Chinese goods. It's a constant complaint. Well, they were of substandard quality. Even if it wasn't, people love to complain about things like that from goods for China, it seems. That has left, I think we just saw, who was it? Was it Ari Fleischer complaining about, and then tweeting about and then deleting for some reason, the claim that the video game controller he bought for his son from China didn't work. And then for some reason that was supposed to be applicable broadly to national policy. And then, for whatever reason, he decided to delete it. And I'm not sure what that would be. Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be that he realized it was stupid. That's just not a thing that he does. Anyway, this whole system of countervailing orders here has left millions of items sitting in U.S. warehouses in China, the Wall Street Journal reported last week. We're essentially which I imagine is supposed to be effed, but it's printed here with dashes. We're essentially effed, said an official who is leading his state's supply chain effort. Pritzker, who has clashed publicly with Trump, is one of several governors who have decided they can't rely on Trump to help or even to stay out of the way. He quietly chartered flights bearing masks and gloves from China to Chicago to prevent Trump from interceding, according to the Chicago Sun-Times. The supply chain has been likened to the Wild West, and once you've purchased supplies, ensuring they get to the state is another Herculean feat, Pritzker press secretary Jordan Abudaya told the paper. And I wonder if he pronounced Herculean the way I did. I'm curious about that one. You got to ride shotgun like an old Wells Fargo thing and be able to shoot bandits in order to make sure you get there with the things you've bought. The federal government is supposed to actually be doing its utmost to protect and facilitate interstate commerce, not add additional transactions costs that include having to hire armed guards in order to repel federal pirates en route. Hogan of Maryland, a rare Republican who has criticized the White House response effort, recently struck a deal with South Korea to provide 500,000 coronavirus test kits. And they've got good ones. Despite Trump's admonition that states should find their own supplies, the president criticized Hogan for the move, which took supplies off the market. If you're going to say states have to do it and then criticize them for doing it, it's arbitrary and capricious by definition. If there was an easier way, we certainly would have taken it, Hogan said Tuesday on MSNBC's Morning Joe. The president said the governors are on their own and they should focus on getting their own tests, and that's exactly what we did. Increasingly, the task force and the innovation team are communicating directly with mayors and business leaders and undermining governors and other politicians who say they aren't getting what they need. I guess the system here is this. If you say, governors, you're on your own, get your own stuff. If Democrats do it, and they do it successfully, then the Trump team looks for Republicans at other levels of government who can still be counted on to screw things up. For example, when Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards, a Democrat, said at a news conference this month that hospitals in the state still needed more ventilators, Trump aides quickly called the CEO of the state's most prominent hospital systems. Hours later, at his own news conference, Trump said the hospital chiefs, quote, feel that they currently have enough ventilators. He thanked Warner Thomas, the CEO of Ochsner Health. I guess I've pronounced that right, maybe, I don't know. Louisiana's largest nonprofit hospital system, and said he would deliver 230,000 surgical gowns. Trump said he would honor a request made by Thomas in place of the ventilators sought by the governor. Governor says we need ventilators. Well, I'll find a guy who says we don't and reward him with gowns instead. And then when people say, well, what are you doing about the need for ventilators in the state? Say, I gave you gowns. That's good enough. Okay, we'll just stuff the gowns down people's throats and see if they work. Why not? I'm telling you to inject bleach. The least you could do is shove a gown down someone's throat. Maybe it'll help. We don't know that it won't. I'm not a doctor. But I have, a good whatever this is here in my skull. Trump and his top aides are particularly proud of a series of partnerships they have formed under the name Project Airbridge. We've heard about that, which has laid claim to much of the available personal protective equipment around the world. In broad terms, the project works like this. The federal government underwrites the cost of shipping freight on FedEx, UPS, and other private air carriers, usually from factories operated by U.S. companies in Asia, so they can be distributed by U.S. companies here. Under the agreements, the federal government gets to put part of the shipment in the Strategic National Stockpile and direct where half of the company's remaining goods go. In other words, the federal government claims control over 3/4 of the goods, while the companies deliver the rest to customers of their choice. It's a kickback for them. It's actually been an amazing story, the cross-supply chain collaboration that's gone on between otherwise competitors, said Blair Childs, a senior vice president of Premier Incorporated, a health consulting firm that has been involved in the project. By gaining the ability to direct half of the goods on the planes, political officials have even more discretion in directing or diverting shipments. Wonderful, exactly what they need, right? State and local officials say they have little visibility into how the system works, which is part of what makes it not arbitrary and capricious when you get challenged in court. Often becoming acquainted with it when they see Trump congratulate a Republican senator in a tough race, like Gardner of Colorado, for securing ventilators or protective equipment, or when the company they bought items from informs them that the federal government laid claim to the stock at the last minute. It's an extraordinary system they've built for themselves. We ought to put them in jail for it. Or frankly, somebody should fry in the electric chair for it, but hey. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, I have my reminder here from Scott to get back to the spoils system thing. The only thing is I'm going to have to scroll around and try and find it. And there's a lot left to this article, and I don't know. I'm getting value out of venting through all this. But again, explaining everything once again and reminding everybody just how extraordinarily dangerous this whole thing is. And it's the Ukraine policy formulation process, which landed them in an impeachment trial, applied to a national security threat and the greatest public health crisis the country has faced in 100+ years, maybe ever, all wrapped up in one. This is not good, as his big, thing in his skull would say. I'll continue on with this because it's so amazing. The federal contracting process is supposed to be devoid of political influence. Again, just wanted to reiterate that. So they do too. So much so that there are prohibitions on contractors making donations or expenditures in connection with federal elections. Typically, big contracts are bid out, and there's significant competition for federal dollars. This is part of the filtering system of keeping, big money out of politics. That thing was failed entirely, of course. But this is true. It's supposed to be devoid of political influence. And it is a good point here. Contractors, so much so that contractors are supposed to be prohibited from making donations or expenditures for federal elections, which brings up another interesting point that I saw Der Wouter tweeting the other day, is the fact that a contract, and this is actually happening, which is amazing enough, another of these mask contracts for people who don't make masks and don't have any experience in sourcing masks. But this one makes arguably slightly more sense. It just doesn't help in the context that brought us here, which is the supposed prohibition of contractors for making federal campaign donations. I mean, I think that goes out the window all the time. You just say one division is the contractor, and this is a different division of the company, and they're the ones giving the money. But the My Pillow guy, you knew he was eventually going to get a federal contract for something. He's been hanging around too many Trump press conferences not to get a contract. Apparently, he got a contract for, I think, masks, but I think it was PPE of some kind. It might be masks, might be gowns. I don't know. What does that mean, or what reason do we have for suspecting that My Pillow has got access to PPE? They don't, and they've been very explicit. They were subcontracting this thing out. They were going to get paid a certain amount of money. Somebody reported it because it was shady looking, because the My Pillow guy's been hanging around all this time, and lo and behold, he gets a $60 million contract for something. And it's masks, and he doesn't make it. So they asked him, why are you contracting for masks? And when are did you get the money? No, I haven't, because I haven't been able to find a subcontractor to make the masks yet. All right, well, why aren't we contracting with the people who make the masks? I don't know, reasons. Now, I say it's arguable that they might, have some claim on it. I have only this to say. I got some masks, not, actual PPE grade masks. But cloth masks, cotton masks. And I bought them from the, you remember this story, right? I told you, we replaced our mattress. I bought it from the manufacturer who made the mattress topper that we bought for the new bed. Avocado is the maker of the mattress. They make these organic mattresses, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't go with a full organic mattress, organic materials. We went with a topper that was made of these organic materials. Organic cotton and organically sourced, wool and natural latex and the whole bit. It's very interesting and all that. We could spend 2 hours on that. But no, we'll spend it on something else. Well, anyway, they, got into the mask manufacturing thing when people needed the cloth masks. So we're sitting on, we're sitting on reams of organic cotton. Is reams the right word? I don't know. They got, I'm sure, giant amounts of organic cotton that they would ordinarily be making bed toppers and mattresses out of. They may or may not have seen a drop in demand for these things during the coronavirus epidemic. But they said, all right, we can make cotton masks, and organic ones at that. People who love organic crap will be like, yeah, let's have some of those. Well, I did. I bought some. I'm not even a big organic guy. But we got some masks, right? So if the mattress company can make masks, can't the pillow company make masks? Sure, they could. Of course, do they have access to, Tyvek to make gowns with? Do they have access to whatever the hell it is you make N95 masks and filters out of? I don't know. Well, no, I do know. The answer is no. They need a subcontractor to do all this stuff. Avocado at least made the things. So I don't know. Just a little diversion there, though. Because otherwise, if I was an important type of person, I would be called out as a hypocrite for saying that the pillow company can't be trusted to provide masks when I bought masks from a mattress company, you see. Anyway, now I'm off the hook, so I can tell you about what's happening in federal contracting according to NBC News, right? So typically big contracts get bid out. The reason they do that, it's open competition. You can document everything being on the up and up, and all the points at which a politician could interfere for political reasons are exposed to examination. But in emergencies, there are, as you might expect, workarounds to accelerate the process. The rules for competition can be waived, and vetting can be less strict. What do you know? The unprecedented nature of the current crisis, in which emergency declarations have been made for more than 50 jurisdictions, that is all the states plus D.C. and some U.S. territories, means the bottom-up system of federal contracting has largely been turned on its head. In the case of Prestige Ameritech, the $9.5 million contract was awarded without competition, which we saw beginning in Iraq, right? And carried through since then, under a waiver for urgent and compelling needs that also requires agency officials to request offers from as many potential sources as is practicable under the circumstances, according to federal contracting records and regulations. But the White House wanted Prestige, according to notes on the contract, which is publicly available on government websites. I don't know whether they forgot about that or not, but it's pretty clear they wanted Prestige, and all they have to do, really, and get away with it even with the courts, is to say, well, as many potential sources as is practicable Well, only one was practicable, and even that usually holds. The procurement of N95 Model 1860 respirators is directed by the White House to protect New York hospital employees and other hospitals throughout the United States from the potential biological harm of COVID-19 during emergency response services, the description of the contract requirement says. Oneko Dunbar, the Homeland Security Department official listed as the user who entered the contract, did not reply to NBC News' request to discuss the work. On April 8th, the day after the last modification to the deal, Texas authorities announced that they would be deploying members of the state's National Guard to work at Prestige Ameritech's headquarters. The company says it is the largest domestic surgical mask manufacturer and will now be able to produce 2 million masks a week. But turning soldiers into private sector labor force doesn't sit well with National Guard expert Dwight Sterling, who called the situation disturbing in an email to NBC News. Ordering service members to help a company make a product, even an important product like masks, upsets the delicate balance the founders established for the use of the military, said Sterling, CEO of the Law and Military Policy Center, who is a JAG officer, Judge Advocate General, JAG officer in the California National Guard and a law professor at the University of Southern California. Not only does the arrangement have the appearance of official endorsement, giving Prestige an unfair advantage over its competitors, less to worry about that now, but it creates public confusion as to the role and mission of the military generally. Simply put, there are many other ways for Governor Abbott to increase mask production that don't involve directing service members to work on the factory floor. And like I said, a little fascist to put state resources, in fact, state military resources, behind a private manufacturing concern. In the only other agreement with a similar notation that NBC News could find in the 11 years or so of online disclosure of federal contracts, one that was first reported by ProPublica, the Trump White House was named in March as the authority seeking a $96 million deal with the Canadian company Airboss of America, even though they're Canadian. As ProPublica reported, the deal calls for the delivery of 100,000 respirators and filters to New York and other locations by July 31st, and it isn't clear why the White House was eager to award the no-bid contract to that company, and also we're going to reopen and the virus is going to disappear, but it's okay to deliver the respirators and filters on July 31st. But all right. Chris Bitsakakis. Yeah, I think I got that right. It's make a lot of people laugh, but Chris Bitsakakis, I think, President and Chief Operating Officer of Airboss of America, which is in Canada. Hi, Canada. You're welcome. It's all right. Said in a statement to NBC News that the coronavirus task force was just one of a long list of entities the company contacted to offer access to its respirator systems, purifiers, and accessories. We reached out to groups including the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, as well as the State Department, the Centers for Disease Control, the Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, right? AMRID from Outbreak. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. HHS, all the letters here. FEMA, the FAA, the National Guard Bureau, which we never call NGB for some reason, and the White House Coronavirus Task Force, or WHTF. Not really. Along with numerous and other federal and state agencies in the United States, otherwise known as the U.S. Bitsakakis said a number of groups, both domestic and international, have responded with orders. The FEMA contract was awarded to our company because of our proven track record. That may be true, but FEMA officials noted in the contract that the acquisition was, quote, ordered by the White House, as opposed to put out the bid or the only practicable provider here is this group, so that. Instead, ordered by the White House. That's just, it's there. And everybody's supposed to say, ooh, ordered by the White House. That's a reason. Prestige Ameritech did not reply to NBC News' questions about its federal contract. While White House officials say the disaster response has been apolitical, the actions they have taken, and the words Trump and other Republican politicians have used strongly suggest that political relationships are a key factor in the distribution of equipment. We will be immediately sending 100 ventilators to Colorado, right, for Senator Gardner. Trump tweeted on April 8th. You know about this. Moving on. The state isn't among the top dozen in per capita or overall infections or deaths from COVID-19. Colorado, that is, Gardner's state. And it actually reduced its request for assistance from the federal government's strategic national stockpile. Hey, but at the time of Gardner's request, state officials believed FEMA had stepped in to stop 500 ventilators from going into the state, with the end result appearing as if FEMA had stopped Democratic Governor Jared Polis's attempt to buy 500 ventilators from a private company, while the president gave 100 back in the name of a Republican senator he's trying to help politically. There's about 500 levels of wrong with that one. The position of the White House is that the data coming from states has been spotty and that requests don't always match need. According to senior administration officials familiar with the thinking of the president's team, they say a major effort is underway to allocate resources based on accurate information from lower levels of government and the private sector. But neither the coronavirus task force nor the White House officials have made information about the state-by-state dispersal of resources available to the public. Again, evidence in favor of a finding of corruption here. Gardner's office didn't respond to NBC News for any request for comment. Colorado's Republicans aren't the only ones crediting the White House intervention for their state supplies. There's McSally in Arizona, of course. The tweets that go back and forth between him and her are illustrative here. During a time of scarcity, the routing of supplies in one direction means they aren't going somewhere else. And FEMA has priority over other customers under certain circumstances. They're linked here to Federal News Network. And their explanation for it. Local officials in various parts of the country have complained that shipments they were expecting were either seized or rerouted by the federal government. The city of Phoenix struggled for weeks to get a supply of protective equipment after ordering $4.2 million worth of goods in late March. Mayor Kate Gallegos' communications officer Annie DeGraw told NBC News on Wednesday night that the city has been taken care of for 2 or 3 weeks. But just last week, Phoenix's fire chief, Kara Kalbrenner, told NBC News affiliate KPNX that Phoenix's order had been hijacked by federal authorities. In similar cases, state and municipal officers have been reluctant to discuss the topic because of their fear that doing so will harm their ability to secure help from the White House, right? You shouldn't, I guess, in their thinking, don't complain about the 500 ventilators that got stolen, because if you do, then Cory Gardner, even though he'll claim credit for it, won't be able to get us the 100 that we need. Do we point out what's going on here, or take the 100 and save 100 lives with the ventilators, even though Trump stole 400 more, both ventilators and lives, from us before? Do we call him out and lose 500, or do we knuckle under and lose 400? It's a tough call. Well, anyway, a FEMA spokesperson said the agency was not seizing or taking PPE from state, local governments, hospitals, or any entities who are lawfully engaged in transactions through which these resources are distributed. Now, here's the trick of finally we get down to what is FEMA telling people about these seizures that make it work. I'm not sure, of course, that it's the case in every such situation, but check this out. All right, see how they set it up? FEMA says, well, we're not seizing anything from anybody if they're lawfully engaged in transactions through which these resources are distributed. So that should be covered because, of course, they're lawfully engaged in these transactions, right? Well, maybe. We've now created a loophole. Well, if it's not legal, then if we seize them, we're still good, right? We're still not seizing anything from anybody involved in a lawful transaction. And you wouldn't want to let unlawful transactions go on, right? Right. Well, what makes a transaction illegal? Well, it might turn out FEMA saying it is. Like, I need these masks. I was instructed by Jared Kushner to pirate these masks. Well, you can't. It's a lawful transaction. I hereby declare it an unlawful transaction. Grab the masks, run away. The state says, they stole our masks. And we say, we're not stealing masks. Yeah, you just stole these. I can prove it. No. We're not stealing masks. We're not taking masks away from anybody involved in anything legal. What you were involved in was illegal. Like this, remember the way back when, in the early days of the Iraq War and post 9/11, the president gets to determine whether you're an enemy combatant. Well, what if he just says somebody he hates is an enemy combatant? Well, yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Well, anyway, here we are. Different bridge, but similar process. We take all accusations of seizure very seriously and support Attorney General Barr's hoarding and price gouging task force, this spokesperson from FEMA went on to say. And watch what happens. If a hospital believes this has happened to them, it should report it to the governor. If a governor believes this has happened to their supplies, it should be reported to the FEMA region. If a company decides to cancel on a state contract in favor of a federal one, FEMA will work with the company and the state to resolve the matter in a way that best serves their people. Now, what's going on here is, well, let's continue with this right up here. Maybe they'll explain it. If they don't, I will. Whether it's the Justice Department's anti-hoarding unit stopping shipments, see, there it is, or companies rerouting them at the behest of the White House task force with control over where much of the private distribution is directed through Project Airbridge, officials at the state and local levels remain deeply frustrated that they can't tell whether the administration is doing more to help or harm their efforts. And not only that, they can't tell under what authority those masks have been diverted. They can, if they've got one of those contracts under Project Airbridge, claim that the contract gives them the right to divert the shipments. And then it's not a seizure, it's just a contractual clause being exercised. If they don't have one of those, right? And here's what's really going on here, right? You might say, well, why would I contract with Project Airbridge if I don't have to? Well, for many suppliers, it's a huge opportunity to make some money, right? If that doesn't entice you into joining Project Airbridge, we can kick back money to you. You'll make a killing. You get to give out a quarter of the supplies to whoever you want, and we pay for the shipping. It's a you wish you could give away 100% of the supplies, sell 100% of the supplies at a markup and not pay for shipping, but that's unrealistic. You can charge marked up prices though for a quarter of what comes through, and we'll pay the shipping. That's still a good deal for you. Are you in? For most, business people, they'll say, yeah, sure, free windfall profits, and big ones at that. Yes, we'll do it. And others might say, that's unethical. I don't want anything to do with it. All right, you can do it your way. You don't have to be a part of Project Airbridge. No one's forcing you to join in our effort to save America. Well, yeah, sure, right. Well, look, we're going to do our own thing. We don't need you. I got my own shipping situation here. I make the masks in a place I control. I control the shipping. I'm going to bring it here, and I'm going to serve my clients just as I've always done. The hospitals and localities that buy from me are going to continue to buy from me, and that's all I need. We're making a tidy profit as it is. I don't need to be a part of your kickback scheme. All right. I'm not going to force you, says Jared Kushner. And here's where the mobster part of it comes in, right? So in comes the flight from wherever, South Korea, and just you're doing business as usual. Honest Masks Incorporated brings in their flight from South Korea, and it's on its way to Mayberry Hospital, which pays by handwritten check and everything. A little old lady who brings the check from the hospital administrator's office every 2 weeks. And she's there to meet the plane at Mayberry International Airport, when all of a sudden come federal agents who say, we're seizing this. Well, under what authority? Well, under the Attorney General's Hoarding and Price Gouging Task Force, of course. Well, but we're not hoarding or price gouging. Well, we say you are. Well, but we're charging just the same we've always charged. In fact, we've cut our prices because we love America and Mayberry so very much. Yeah, well, here's the problem. Here's how we define hoarding and price gouging. If you're in Project Airbridge, you're doing it right. If you're not a part of Project Airbridge, you're doing it wrong. You're hoarding. How am I hoarding? I'm selling the stuff at below market prices, below my usual markup prices, because it's an emerging. I'm selling them at cost. How is that hoarding? How is hoarding them? Well, those masks belong in the control of FEMA and in the national stockpile so they can be given out where they're most needed. That is to say, where they have the most political impact, but where they're most needed. If it's not in the national stockpile, where is it? Well, in our view, in an emergency like this, if it's not in the national stockpile, it's being hoarded. That's that. You lose. Now, what's next? Of course, Honest Masks Incorporated says, maybe we should. Could we still, is it too late to get in on this Project Airbridge thing? I don't know what kind of guy Jared Kushner is. He might say, now you've come to your senses. Yes, absolutely. Or is it, no, you disappointed me and the family. I don't know what kind of response it's going to be. But what a way to recruit people for Project Airbridge, right? If you're not in it, you are by definition, more or less, hoarding or price gouging. One of the two damn things. I don't know which one. It doesn't matter. The point is, give me the damn masks, and that's that. So now you know how he built Project Airbridge out of nowhere. If you don't participate, you don't get to sell on the market. And the Attorney General is the one enforcing it. Pretty amazing. Well, there you go. So let's see. Even in the hardest hit areas, the federal government's deals with distributors haven't led to more protective equipment arriving at hospitals, according to an industry consultant. That's evident from pictures of health professionals working in garbage bags and homemade masks. Something's not adding up, the consultant said. In a letter published in the New England Journal of Medicine on April 17th, we never did read that, Andrew Artenstein, I hope I've got it, or maybe Artenstein, I don't know, the chief physician executive and chief academic officer at Bay State Health in Massachusetts, described the harrowing experience of going through a broker and repelling the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to get masks for hospital workers. Hours before our planned departure, we were told to expect only a quarter of our original order. Why? Because half would be redirected under a Project Airbridge contract clause, and half of that would, half of what remained in the hands of the shipper would also likewise be diverted, but a quarter remained in the hands of the shipper, and they intended to sell them to Bay State Health. We went anyway, says the doctor here, since we desperately needed any supplies we could get. Before we could send the funds by wire transfer, at least, 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents arrived, maybe. They said they were that. Showed their badges, maybe, and started questioning me. No, this shipment was not headed for resale or the black market. Artenstein persuaded the agents to let his team take the boxes of masks back with them, but he learned that the Homeland Security Department was still considering redirecting our PPE, even after all of that. It took the intervention of Representative Richard Neal, Democrat of Massachusetts, the powerful chairman of the Tax Writing Ways and Means Committee, to put the question to rest. And by the way, it's Richard Neal on whom we are depending to invoke the properly allocated federal authority to demand Donald Trump's tax returns from the IRS, and they're in court suing about that. Well, still, he never did get around to it. And what do we think the odds of him executing on that are now that he has had to step in and call in a favor to get PPE for Bay State Medical? Once he was in touch with the various federal agencies, they were accommodating and released the equipment to Bay State. Dylan Opalich, a spokeswoman for Neal, said in an email to NBC News. Meanwhile, in Florida, a state that's crucial to Trump's plans for winning re-election, DeSantis has had difficulty with such gray market transactions. That's, in scare quotes, gray market, because we just declared it to be black. Well, it isn't black, so all right, it's gray. But he hasn't had a problem getting what he wants from the administration. Last week, he said Florida was due to receive 1 million N95 masks from the federal government after he sought help from the president's team. That's been a real problem, DeSantis said, of finding quality goods at reasonable prices on the open market. But I'm glad we were able to work this out with the White House. And that's it. That's the end of the story, finally. There's an awful lot packed into it, and a lot of it we kind of knew in bits and pieces or even in the overarching story. But there are some great illustrations in this one. And now here we are on our third break, and after which we can I can use the break, I guess, to try and dig up the story about the overt abandonment of reforms that rid us at one point of the spoils system. And I found it. Great. So even before the music has set off, so I know we're set up for the other side of the break. There's much more. There's a million more stories, of course, that now I won't get to bring you, but I don't know. I think the spoils system part probably won't even take us all that long. Probably could have crammed it in over the music. But we'll get to it. We'll do it afterwards. I have a feeling that maybe where I want to do at this point is take you overseas to update you on what we have learned about the way the UK government responded to the coronavirus crisis, much of which has been visible, but a lot of which is more visible over there than here, and we need to share in their misery after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with our storyline here. I told you I would get to this spoils system thing, and I don't know how much there is to it. Let's check it out. I saw the tweet the other day, the 22nd, that would have been Wednesday, from David Burbach, I'm guessing. Who is David? Let's take a look. Twitter bio says, Professor of International Relations and National Security, Civil, Military, Space, /Nuclear Africa. This is, he's separated by commas. So International Relations and National Security professor at the Naval War College, where, all our government people, I guess, will learn all this stuff from. So what does he have to say about this? He seems like a knowledgeable enough authority. He begins his tweet, "Holy crap!" So that's not good. He's a professor at the Navy War College. Holy crap! OPM director, that is the Office of Personnel Management, the people who are responsible typically for staffing the government, essentially. And the establishment of the OPM and their guidelines is part of this, 100 years plus of reform of the old spoils system. The first one, in fact, when the spoils were primarily about the federal jobs that could be handed out. Of course, federal jobs were valuable not only because people made money at them, but also because there was even more money to be made by awarding contracts to others, but it's all of a piece. Anyway, OPM, the OPM director now opposes the very concept of a professional civil service. That's the crowning accomplishment of the reform of the spoils system. Non-political staffing of the bulk of the federal government. They're, up at the top of the agencies, political appointees to try to affect a legitimately elected president's will on the federal government, unlike, Donald Trump, not legitimately elected, etc. But, okay. So, holy crap, OPM director opposes the very concept of a professional civil service, wants to go back to the spoils system, where your mailman, park ranger, and weather forecaster get their jobs as political patronage. He has included here a link to the tweet of Andrew Feinberg. Andrew Feinberg, a Newsweek White House correspondent, who, I guess the White House correspondent, who, I don't know, maybe they have several, who tweets this from April 21st, so going back to Tuesday, ancient times. Buried in this, another link. Buried in this D. Lipman piece, Daniel Lipman, a Politico White House reporter. Buried in this Daniel Lipman piece is a terrifying item. The acting OPM director, quote, questions the constitutionality of the 1883 Pendleton Act, which codifies using merit to pick government officials, and believes that all executive branch employees should be political appointees. Isn't that something? I told you, 100 years plus of reform out the window. Daniel Lippman's tweet says, scoop. As COVID-19 keeps most federal employees at home, congressional Dems, who are also mostly kept at home, say that the Office of Personnel Management is refusing to brief the Hill on the status of the agency and federal employees' teleworking arrangements, a number of Dems told me. This is the included article from Politico. Democrats blast Trump team's handling of federal workers in a coronavirus crisis. This doesn't even have to do with the actual thievery that's going on out there. However, it may be that the questions arose because they asked, well, how is FEMA justifying all of this stuff, and who are the people who are okaying this? And they said, federal workers. Well, can we talk to them? No, they're all teleworking. Well, I mean, can't we contact them with some questions? I don't know. And no, you can't, as a matter of fact. Well, why not? Well, because we haven't really worked out any rules for how they can respond to you. Well, can you get on that? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. They're using this as an excuse not to respond to requests for information from the oversight committees. OPM, they say, is stonewalling their requests for information. Daniel Lippman's article then goes on to say, as President Donald Trump tries to reopen the country after more than a month of lockdown, Democrats say the government's top human resources office is stonewalling their efforts to understand how and when the federal government itself will return to normal. Specifically, the Office of Personnel Management is refusing to brief Capitol Hill on the status of the agency and federal employees' teleworking arrangements, Democrats say. Congressional oversight isn't an optional exercise to be left up to the Trump administration, said Representative Jerry Connolly of Virginia, chairman of the Government Operations Subcommittee of the House Oversight and Reform Committee. Our committee has serious questions about OPM's decision-making related to COVID-19, including unclear telework guidance, a lack of actions taken to protect federal employees, and now we learn guidance or standards to reopen government that abdicate any leadership responsibility. This lack of accountability from OPM will not be tolerated, but it also won't be punished. So you could argue it'll be tolerated. OPM is essentially the federal government's HR department. It guides the 2 million strong federal workforce, which makes up a disproportionately large percentage of employees across the Washington, D.C. area, and decisions about how to deploy federal workers are more firmly in the control of the president, who is eager to get the U.S. economy humming again amid our meat and toilet paper shortage, than are those of America's governors and mayors. I don't know if I could believe that. But the requests for updates have come from a number of congressional committees, including Connolly's subcommittee and the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. But in the last 3 weeks, Jonathan Blythe, the head of OPM's Congressional Affairs Shop and the former chief of staff at the agency, has twice declined the request, citing, quote, a very dynamic situation with our response to COVID-19. It has always been difficult to get information from this administration, but the refusal to provide Congress with a basic briefing during a pandemic is especially egregious, said a Democratic Senate aide. We've never been denied a briefing like this before. Well, now you're being denied everything, so just get used to it. Blythe didn't respond to a request for this comment for this article, but an OPM spokesperson noted that his boss, the agency's acting director, that's right, another one of these acting directors, has spoken with Representative Mike Quigley, Democrat of Illinois, chairman of the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee on Appropriations. More generally, Trump officials reject Democrats' broader criticism of the administration's handling of the federal personnel issues during the crisis, stressing that the government remains open and essential services are still flowing. Now, as conditions warrant across each state, federal agencies will be able to return operations to normal, said a spokesperson for OMB, Office of Management and Budget. This administration remains committed to serving the American public. Our federal workers have shown tremendous fortitude in keeping the U.S. strong. But Democrats' frustrations with OPM are boiling over as the agency, which sets HR guidelines and policies across the federal workforce, and the Presidential Personnel Office, which keeps hiring like college seniors for some reason, to do all of its work, which places political appointees into jobs across the administration, are in the throes of upheaval. Former officials and others have expressed concern in interviews that OPM's new leadership favors sweeping changes to the federal workforce in ways that would fundamentally change the nature of government service. At the same time, other top officials are seeking to align the federal workforce more squarely with President Trump's political agenda, rankling longtime civil servants. The drive has been spearheaded by John McEntee, the 29-year-old head of PPO and a fierce Trump loyalist. OPM is currently headed up by, well, you heard it, Acting Director Mike Regas, who assumed the role in mid-March after the abrupt resignation of Dale Cabanis. Remember that? Who stepped down because of alleged poor treatment by several Trump appointees. Regas has worked as the deputy director of OPM for the last 2 years and is also an alum of the Heritage Foundation. Regas is holding down 2 jobs at the moment. What an industrious guy. He was named last month as another Acting Deputy Director of Management at the Office of Management and Budget. So OPM and OMB, is that right? Oh, no, 2 OPM jobs. Deputy Director, where are we? Acting Director and also Acting Deputy Director of Management. Yeah, okay, so right, OPM and OMB. Nobody at OMB has just 1 job. By the way, is, what's his name? Who was I've already forgotten, the old acting White House Chief of Staff. He was also an OPM or OMB official. Did he keep the OMB job after getting fired as White House Chief of Staff or no? I don't even know. Since taking charge, Regas has put his stamp on OPM's front office and is bringing George Nesterchuk, I guess, Nesterczuk, aboard as senior advisor. According to 2 people familiar with the matter, he previously did organizational and HR consulting for government contractors and management consulting firms. Nesterchuk has been Trump's first choice to head up OPM, but withdrew in August of 2017, so now he worms his way back in, after criticism from federal employee unions who didn't like the role he played in trying to enact a pay system based on performance at the Defense Department, and raised questions about his work for the Ukrainian government. He served 2 stints at OPM during both the Reagan and George W. Bush administrations, and has also worked on Capitol Hill at the Department of Transportation and Defense. Capitol and those departments. Regas has told colleagues that he questions the constitutionality. Right, so this is like the judges now who come when they won't say whether Brown v. Board was correctly decided. But he questions the constitutionality of the 1883 Pendleton Act, which codifies using merit to pick government officials and would limit him in his ability to embed political activists in the government. And then, by the way, still leverage the protection that federal law gives them against dismissal by the next administration. So that's kind of important too, which I think that protection should go out the window if you think the Pendleton Act is unconstitutional and you embed people in there. Well, then, they've been improperly installed and it's not a violation of law to root them out and replace them with genuinely nonpartisan civil servants anyway. Okay, well, he thinks the Pendleton Act is unconstitutional and believes that all executive branch employees should be political appointees, top to bottom, according to a person who has discussed the matter with him. The arrival of Regas comes amid a push by McEntee and his allies to install other Trump loyalists across the executive branch, but at least that's McEntee's job. McEntee is working in concert with Paul Dans, OPM's new White House liaison and senior advisor, whose rapid efforts to consolidate his control over other agency appointees has irritated some officials. Dans has also castigated other OPM officials for relying on career employees he suspects are Democrats, according to 2 people familiar with the interactions. He's also been asking how many policy jobs the government can shift from career officials to political appointees, a line of inquiry the people saw as an effort to install Trump loyalists in key posts, because it was. Dan's had no comment, but an OPM spokesperson said, all employees in the executive branch have an obligation to carry out administration policy at the direction of the president, who is elected by the American people, but not really, because the American people voted for the other one. Other recent conversations inside the personnel office have raised further hackles. For instance, the Trump administration has had discussions on creating a new schedule. Term of art, you'll see about that in a schedule, which regulates how agencies hire people so they could make more jobs accepted service to make it easier to hire and fire people who are involved in policy jobs. The schedule is, if you've ever seen it, if you haven't, it won't make much sense to you, but people get hired on to the civil service at different levels, like in the military, if you're familiar with some of those things, like, E ranks and listed ranks, and you have your ranks, of course, privates, corporals, etc. But E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, like that. They have GS 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 14, I think. And then they have senior executive service jobs over that, and then political appointees sit atop that. But they would like a new schedule that would reorient the numbers, I guess, to whatever their political advantage might be. This does continue on at some length, but we did finally get around to their idea that the Pendleton Act was unconstitutional. I don't know. Maybe 5 black robes one day will decide that it is, because, I don't know, this seems to present a momentary advantage. So what the hell? We'll just throw it out. And we'll see whether they ever succeed in that. There's more to it, and there's more interesting stories of other young, recent grads, or in this case, George Washington University senior, still a senior, to be McEntee's right-hand man in all of this. So I'll just skip down to this part here. PPO recently brought a 4th college senior, there's 4 of them now, to be a Trump administration official, after previously hiring a GWU senior to be right-hand man, and Iowa State University senior to be deputy White House liaison at the Department of Commerce, and a University of Virginia senior to temporarily help with paperwork for DOD appointees, Department of Defense. The 4th college senior is Jordan Haley, a Liberty University senior who's supposed to be back at school because they're open, majoring in history and international relations, who started in February as PPO's external relations director. In that role, her job is to conduct outreach and build relationships with agencies, potential hires, and outside organizations. She'll receive her undergraduate degree in May upon finishing one last class, according to a senior administration official. The White House is proud to have such a capable young woman for this position. And what are you, a sexist? Probably, for objecting to the idea of hiring people before they've even graduated for such important political work. Okay. I just wanted to throw that one in there and make it clear that they're being more overt than we imagined would be the case about undermining like I said, the 100 years of reform that have moved us away from the corrupt spoils system. But now back to it, because whatever, that's what Donald Trump does. And I guess that's why he hangs portraits of Andrew Jackson in his office, despite all the controversy. All right, controversy. Murder. But okay, we can deal with that another day. I also hinted to you that the United Kingdom was going to hell, and I thought we maybe should catch up on some of that. And I don't know how much of it we're actually going to be able to read, because I think a lot of it was broken by the Times of London, which is paywalled almost always. But I do have the tweet thread of Owen Jones, a Guardian columnist who also, by the way, identifies himself as socialist, anti-fascist Guardian columnist, an author. And he notes, sadly, losing my northern accent by every passing day. Very sad. All right. His tweet thread begins this way. The Sunday Times investigation into the government's, and this again, the UK government's, catastrophic handling of the coronavirus, which included seeing Boris Johnson and the health minister both hospitalized with coronavirus. But more disastrous than even that, The disastrous and catastrophic, handling of the coronavirus is one of the most important things you've read. It's behind a paywall, so here's a thread with the key points. Make sure everyone sees it, because not everyone can see the rest of it. Oh, and look at that. No, that's too bad. I wonder if... No, I guess I can't even rely on Pocket for that one. He had screen grabs of it so that people could understand what was going on. We'll have to now rely, though, on his narrative for it, because the screen grabs have been taken down for copyright violations. And I guess that makes a certain amount of sense, right? But interesting that they're going to continue to paywall that stuff when, well, in the United States, so many publications have decided not to paywall their important coronavirus-related information. But the policies are not consistent across publications. Some say pretty much anything that has to do with COVID-19 will be unpaywalled. Others would say, well, if it's information like don't drink or inject bleach, we won't paywall that. But if it's an investigation into government corruption, like appointing the CEO of Clorox to the task force, that will paywall. Well, anyway, let's see what the description said. Hopefully, Owen Jones will give us a good enough look into what happened here. Boris Johnson, he starts out with, was absent from the first Cobra meeting on coronavirus. And unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough with the system there to tell you what Cobra is, but it's starting to look in context where I've seen it here and elsewhere, like it's, important top-level, cabinet-level discussions, I guess, among the various ministers. I'm sorry, I don't know enough about that. And maybe all of you who are familiar with UK governance are rolling your eyes. Let me see. Cobra UK government. Tell me what that is quickly, Google. Cabinet Office Briefing Rooms. These rooms are used, of course, for committee which coordinate the actions of government bodies. Okay. Popularly referred to as Cobra. So, okay. Cabinet Office Briefing Rooms. And an A on the end, because Cobra is hard to pronounce. Okay, where were we? So, Boris Johnson was absent from the first Cobra meeting on coronavirus. Why? Not yet in the hospital. He was instead hanging out with a Chinese New Year dragon. And as I recall, the screen caps from the Times was just a publicity picture, photo op thing of Boris Johnson playing around with the people dressed up as the Chinese dragon for the New Year. Okay, fine. Not really something you should be doing instead of getting a coronavirus briefing, but perhaps they just didn't know or acknowledge how serious it was at that point, even though it was February. Boris Johnson's government then continually played down the looming disaster, claiming Britain was prepared, like we did, and missed 4 further Cobra meetings on coronavirus. Our president just ignored them, even if he was there. Boris Johnson didn't attend a Cobra meeting on coronavirus for 5 weeks, till last month. And then, of course, it was too late, and then he got the coronavirus. The Prime Minister's reputation as lazy and complacent was proven. We have a guy with that reputation. All the fears about him were vindicated. A public inquiry into the unnecessary deaths of thousands of people because of disastrous government failings must not be a whitewash. That's up to us. And I guess they're actually going to have such an inquiry. We're not entirely clear whether we're really going to have it. We've got some people being, nominated to oversight committees, but it hasn't actually happened yet. Oh, and I've disappointed Skip Bitter, who's listening to the show and thought that they might be able to help out and check out what is Cobra, but I'm too fast. Don't feel bad about it. Googling while podcasting, and still said it before I could type it, says Skip Bitter. This is true, but as I understand it, and I think this is still the case, the stream runs about 15 seconds delayed. So I have a 15-second head start built into it, and all I had to do was type Cobra UK government. So don't feel too bad about it. By the time you heard it, I had already typed it. So, but I also was a pretty fast typist back in the day. All right, well, back to the story. Conservative austerity over in the UK, which is what we were really talking about, left us without the PPE we needed for a pandemic. That, too, sounds familiar. Scientists pleaded with the government that mass casualties were coming and they needed to obtain emergency supplies of protective gowns and masks. Instead, the government, at that point, unfortunately, exported supplies to China, which, possibly defensible given that, the news was people are dying hand over fist in China and not here. So you want to help. But, maybe with an eye toward preparing for the future, that's also true. On January 22nd, Professor Neil Ferguson warned that coronavirus could be more infectious than Spanish flu, which killed tens of millions. Professor Ferguson warned there needed to be a lockdown. The government dismissed this as something out of a post-apocalyptic movie or post-apocalypse movie. By late January, the seriousness of the virus was clear, and as was the fact that it was going to imminently arrive on British shores. On paper, we carried on pretending that a pandemic was the number one threat facing Britain. In practice, preparations for a pandemic had been destroyed by austerity. We knew he didn't have enough PPE and intensive care ventilators. We didn't. Because a pandemic rehearsal was conducted in 2016, but the recommendations weren't implemented. Why? Because all resources were being wasted on preparing for a no-deal Brexit instead. The other disaster, the one they were doing on purpose. Pandemic planning was repeatedly bumped off the diary, and the government advisory on pandemics were left desperately joking among the government advisory, the advisors in our version of the English language on pandemics were left desperately joking amongst themselves. Let's hope we don't get a pandemic. Okay, so austerity and complacency meant we were left dreadfully exposed to a pandemic. But even in February, when the nightmare scenario looked ever more likely, there was little urgency. The government pursued herd immunity, though thought that this was essentially the flu, and so abandoned the testing and contact tracing strategy. The government failed to obtain the testing equipment needed, even though we had the capacity to mass produce it. The government didn't approach most of those firms that could produce it until April 1st. April Fools. The government failed to replenish supplies of gowns and stocks for the NHS and care workers at the start of February. Many have died, and many will still almost certainly die as a consequence. Again, government complacency has killed. Then the next tweet here says, absolutely astonishing, Singapore copied the UK pandemic plan. The difference is they implemented it and we didn't. A deadly pandemic was about to ravage Britain and our Prime Minister was, what? Demob happy? Demob. You tell me what slang that means. Telling everyone to be confident and calm. It was clear how horribly serious this was in late January and early February, and yet drastic action was not taken. The threat level was kept at moderate. Key experts called for a lockdown almost 4 weeks before it happened. Instead of going to Cobra meetings, Boris Johnson went to a Tory fundraising ball. One donor coughed up £60,000 for a game of tennis with him. And there's more, and so far I haven't even seen them hinting at it yet. But the government's disastrous decisions have left over 15,000 officially dead in hospital. The real death toll is much higher. And at least 50 doctors, nurses, and NHS workers are dead as well. Here's the key line from a senior Department of Health insider, and one that should be all this government is remembered for. We could have been Germany, or Singapore for that matter, but instead we were doomed by our incompetence, our hubris, and our austerity. The whole article is here. There's a link, and you can get it and get behind the paywall if you want to. Thousands and thousands of people have died and will die because of what this government has done. Meanwhile, some real truth to power is being spoken over at the BBC News main page, to which he links, and you can read on there. What's not discussed here, but was discussed among others who have been pointing this out for whatever reason. Apparently, Boris Johnson was terribly distracted during this period, not just by the hopeful planning for a no-deal Brexit, but apparently also by the fact that he was in the middle, I guess, still of a nasty divorce or separation, and his mistress was pregnant. That'll take your eye off the ball, I guess, but not discussed in this thread. We'll have to find evidence of it elsewhere, I suppose. But widely discussed and widely talked about. Let's see. So here we are, departing now for the weekend. We have hit our Worldometer's 50,000 deaths mark. Remember that we're supposed to make it to 60 only by August, but instead it looks like we'll make it there maybe before the 1st of May. We can hope for a leveling off of deaths for a little while, and maybe we're over the hump and on the way back down, but we're up at 2,500 or so official coronavirus deaths according to the testing regimes at this point, so it's a long way back down. All right, so hang on for the weekend. We'll be back on Monday, of course, and Greg Dworkin at that point will help us catch up. There's so many more things that I wanted to bring to your attention, but you know how the news gets crazy these days. Justice Putnam, though, will help make up for some of that deficit next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He's got all kinds of great stuff to share with you. Let's see. Oh, look, a mention of Connecticut as well. We'll tell you what that's about after this short break.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How did we miss this one? The Supreme Court sided with a small Connecticut company in a trademark infringement case against fashion leader Fossil. Well, we'll find out what that's all about and why that's important next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and a number of other amazing stories from around the country and around the world, as always. And we'll see you